Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new year of Bookaholic. I'm so glad you're here. I would just like to say at first, thank you for all the Bookaholic supporters, whether you were an author who I interviewed in 2021, and perhaps your interview is still in the pipeline to be produced. Also to businesses and my small staff, and certainly to my viewers on YouTube and my listeners on the Google, Apple, and Spotify podcast and other podcast platforms where you may listen to Bookaholic. Thank you so much. You made 2021 very successful for me, and I appreciate it. And I'm planning on even a greater 2022 for you. Thanks for all of my returning listeners. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm glad to have you here as well. If you obsess over books, book news, book reviews, book trivia, authors, then this is the space for you. So let's dive right into it after this. Now, in 2021, if you followed my channels and podcast, you saw where we read many BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color books, authors, and the stories that they created. We did a lot of that. This year, we're going to continue that because I do feel culturally and still at this time frame that we are in America and in our world, it is very important to listen and read to those stories about people of color. It's very important for a deeper understanding of each other. Now, I would like to do a shout out to two wonderful people, Jamise Harper, and I hope I'm saying her first name correctly. She's known as Spines Vines on Instagram, and Jane Mount, who together they curated a book called Bibliophile Diverse Voices. So I think Jamise did a lot of the curating of the books, and Jane was the artist of the book. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I mean, you can't help but to be attracted to it because of the beautiful artwork that Jane Mount did. She also has another book called Bibliophile, which was the first one she did with the same beautiful artwork. It's books in general. And so I naturally picked up both of those books. I had Bibliophile first, and then when I heard that she was doing a book with Jamise Harper and they were doing Diverse Spines, I was just excited and I couldn't wait for it to come out. So I did pre-order that book, but I have those books on my shelf. And those two people did a wonderful job of curating and displaying books by BIPOC authors and their stories. And so it's a great place to start if you want some direction on what to read for diverse stories and diverse authors. That is a great book to pick up for you to read and begin to curate and read alongside with Bookaholic this year on books that feature BIPOC authors. So I definitely would suggest that you pick that right on up. And I'll have a link to that book in down below and in the show notes. Now, so how are we going to continue to read the BIPOC authors in 2022 with a little bit of a different direction than we did in 2021? So I have 3 challenges this year for our reading challenge in general here on Bookaholic. And the first thing is that because we're still living under the shadows of the summer of 2020, with the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many more people to even name, we still are needing a deeper understanding in our world about other people and other cultures and just just other people in general. Life is changing rapidly. There are people who are now visible. They were always here, but they are now more visible because, thank goodness, a lot of our laws have changed in the last 10 to 15 years, and that's helped make people feel safer to come out and say who they really are. And so, as people show themselves and their truth and stop living in shadows, there are other people who are afraid of that, who get angry at that. And so, if most people, you would ask them, do you believe in love and treating people with respect? They would say yes, but then their actions say something else. So I do believe reading is not a cure-all, but it is certainly a reach toward a greater understanding. So, one, I would like to reach out to white people to read more BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, books and stories. I think that would help them understand a lot of the trauma, otherwise pain, and concerns that they don't even think about. And I'm not saying they're bad people for not thinking about that, but they're just not aware of it. I just think people are just not aware of it. I think people live their lives to their degree, and they really don't sometimes actually think about another person's and the journeys that they're making in their shoes, and they don't know what has caused it. So I think this would lead to a greater understanding for white people. Then I would also reach out to BIPOC people to read other BIPOC stories. And so with that said, I myself have picked up more books by Native Americans, more books by Asian Americans. You need to read about other BIPOC people's stories as a BIPOC person, because your BIPOC story is not the only one that has suffered or lived in some type of trauma. And all, let me clarify this, all BIPOC stories are not about trauma. There is joy to our stories as well. So we need to remain diverse in our reading, as well as I'm encouraging white readers to read diverse stories too. Now, last, I would actually like for people to really stretch their minds to genres or mechanisms that they just have put aside and said, nah, I'm not reading this. I don't like it. And I'm not doing it. And so for me, full confession, that was poetry. I have been famous in saying that I hate poetry. I think if you go back to listening to my first podcast, you'll hear how I became a book junkie. And then I said I hate poetry. And, that sounds terrible. It sounds ignorant, and which I am totally against ignorance. And so I decided that 2022, is the year that I'm going to commit to getting wiser and better on poetry. I know that there's poetry out there that I can relate to and that I can understand. And I've already started that journey, and I have already found some poems that I enjoy and they have meaning, and I did understand them. And so I'm challenging you to read things that you just don't understand, and that it's just kind of made your eyes glaze over, and seek an understanding, whether it's from a librarian or an author, or here on the Bookaholic Podcast and YouTube channel, to try to understand something that you just have just totally put away. I have been embracing poetry. I've got 5 books of poetry on their way, and I've got like 2 or 3 poetry collections already here at my home. So definitely I am trying to breach that poetry divide that I had in my head. The other thing that I just could not grasp upon and wasn't even trying was listening to audiobooks. And so I have decided that I'm going to try to breach that divide also. So right now I am listening to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And so it's very enjoyable. I am listening and I'm understanding, and it's something about the voice that keeps you glued to the story instead of your mind wandering. And if you listen to my podcast last year, I interviewed Robin Whitten of Audiophile magazine, and we discussed audiobooks. And so that was part of why I wanted to go ahead and seek out audiobooks, because of that very moving and enjoyable interview with Robin Whitten. And so I would advise you also, if you've been turning off and not listening through audiobooks, to give them a chance as well. So there you have it. The 3 challenges for the Bookaholic reading challenge for 2022 is seeking for more white people to read BIPOC authors and stories. I'm seeking BIPOC people to read more other BIPOC authors and stories. And I'm seeking you to breach a divide of genres and mechanisms that you approach your reading. Try some other avenues, and you might find out you will enjoy it or even get some type of learning from it. So it's all about new experiences, but either way, it's all about being and doing better and taking care of yourself. Now, how many books are you planning to read in 2022? So my goal that I put on Goodreads this year is 50. I've been going up steadily over the last few years, and I decided on 50 being my number. So if you take that very practically and mathematically, that's an average of 4 books a month, which equals 48. And then you have 2 books left over. So here's how I plan on doing it. I plan on actually reading 3 physical books during a month and listening to an audiobook. As I go along in 2022, that might actually have to become listening to 2 audiobooks and reading 2 physical books. But either way, it still counts. But I'm giving this a try first. Now, with the 2 left over, my methodology is for that to be large tomes. And so for me, I'm choosing to read some historical books, but along the way, nothing rushed, very self-paced, but as long as I have them done by December the 31st and meet my goal, hey, it's a thumbs up. And those 2 books are The 1619 Project, which has been crafted by Nicole Hannah-Jones. So it's not only her writing it, but also some other writers in there as well, as well as poems, etc., and other information within that book. And then I'm going to take the book 400 Souls, which was curated by Ibram X. Kendi, and I believe her name is Keisha Blaine. They curated 400 Souls. So those are very large books and historical books and kind of like textbooks that I'm going to read along the way to make up that 50. And don't forget, whether it'll be for me or for you, don't forget, when counting your books of how many books you want to read in a year, short books count, and it's okay. Comic books count, and it's okay. Inspirational books. You might have a book that you're following every day to read for an inspiration, and maybe there's 365 passages in the book. Well, hey, that's one of your books, and by the end of the year, you should be finished with that book. So those types of books count, and it's okay. Remember, reading is reading, okay? It's all an act of enlightenment and self-care, and so it's valid no matter how you achieve it. So here's what we're reading for January, and I'm following my own advice, and I am reading 2 books by Asian authors or Asian American authors, and one is White Ivy by Susie Yang, and one is Intimacies, and I want to make sure I get her last name right. Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And third, I am listening to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, as I mentioned earlier. So I'll have all of those books linked in the show notes and below the video. So that's our January reading. So I'm stretching myself as a BIPOC person to read other BIPOC stories and from BIPOC authors. And I'm also expanding my reading mechanism to audiobooks by listening to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo via Scribed. So, I'm stretching in 2022. Now, what's coming up next in January? So January is the month of resolutions and goals, and how do you want to improve your life, and where do you want to go from here? And everybody's thinking right now, whether it's about their mental health or financial health or physical health or career or whatever, everyone's thinking about what can I do better, or what more can I do to improve my life. And so I have the pleasure later on this month of speaking to Vernon Davis, a man who wrote a book about his journey of how he combated diabetes and won by natural methods of diet and exercise. So I can't wait to talk to Vernon, because so many people in our country are pre-diabetic and diabetic, and you can tell by the volume of commercials that come on, from gadgets to medications for diabetes, that it is indeed a serious health crisis in America. So I can't wait to speak to him, and you should stay tuned to listening to his story as well, if health is one of the things that you're focusing on in 2022. Also, like I was saying, people want to improve their lives. A lot of times they need motivation, and January is a good time to get prepped up and prompt for the rest of the year about your motivation. And I've also interviewed a published teen author, Sarah Humphreys, who took a writing workshop, was guided by a published author, and she pitched her story, and now it's published. And she's a teenager with a published book. So that's something to say about motivation and encouragement for those of you who may be full-fledged adults who have this book in your computer and you're doubting yourself and not going for it. So we're going to talk to Sarah Humphreys and see if we can inspire and encourage some of our older writers out there to really get on the stick and get that book or story published. So January seems to be very exciting. I can't wait to share those stories with you. And don't forget about February. Stay tuned for February. It is Black History Month, and we certainly will be celebrating Black authors. We're going to read some Black classics. Let me just censor myself here. Let me edit myself here and say they're not Black classics. They're American classics. They're American classic books that you may not heard of, from authors that you may not heard of, but yet they have made an impact in our society. So I can't wait to reveal those books to you in the next couple of weeks. And we also will be having a premiere interview with the North Carolina Poet Laureate, Jackie Shelton Green. She is the first African-American Poet Laureate for North Carolina. She teaches at Duke University. She has a women's writing retreat. I can't wait to talk to her. We're going to find out all about her and celebrate her as our Black history icon, as well as she's going to help us do a deeper dive in understanding poetry and the importance of poetry. So definitely stay tuned to the Bookaholic Podcast, the Bookaholic YouTube channel, for these upcoming exciting events. Well, there you have it. That's our overview for Bookaholic for 2022. Also, what's coming up in the next few weeks. I hope you join us. Don't forget, we are on Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcast, and many other podcast platforms where you may listen to podcasts. We also are here on YouTube. And if you have any suggestions or would like to be on the show, feel free to reach out to me at readingjunkie@book-a-holic.com. We're on Twitter at TrueBookaholic1, and we're on Facebook and Instagram at TrueBookaholic. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to continue to talk to you for 2022.
Thank you for joining the Bookaholic Podcast. We appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Instagram at True Bookaholic. You can also email us at readingjunkie@book-a-holic.com. Don't forget to support your local library and independent bookstores.